Okay, the black guy who was an ex-Marine who shot and killed the police officers in Dallas from a position on the roof. No, white people didn't abuse him. He didn't have racial incidents in the military. He was motivated by Black Lives Matter, and he was drudging up ancient history of these issues in the past, and they were bringing them present again. And that's what they do in the Middle East constantly. Bygones be bygones in that way. We're not talking with a person that you have some history with. We're talking about people that don't exist anymore. That's the past. The present are the people that are living, and that history does matter. But what he drug up and what they drink up all the time is Emmett Till, the civil rights movement. And they drum up all these things that have nothing to do with issues today. And they constantly use that to stir up people. So nothing will get settled in the Middle East if we constantly are going back to the Muslim-Christian wars and the Crusades. And we go back to the ancient history with that. Which, if it isn't happening today, but ISIS was today, and to move forward, we have to break or eliminate those people involved to move forward to a better future. But what Black Lives Matter did is dredge up all the civil rights movements and everything else, and there's all this discrimination and and then I look at the black, like the Fad Five from the University of Michigan. They extorted who? White people. Do you know where all that money came from, the boosters that paid them? It wasn't black people, it was white people. Eric Dickerson at SMU. When he got all that booster money, who did he extort? White people. So all those black athletes, the boosters, and all these big programs were white. And they were giving them unbelievable amount of money. Oklahoma and all the corruption there. Those athletes were getting big payoffs from boosters. And those boosters were primarily all white people, giving it to all these black athletes, and they were holding these schools and programs hostage. And so, but no one talks about those wrongs. And then all the cheating scandals and everything else they did. And they got universities in incredibly horrible places and programs in incredibly horrible places. So I think about those things. Those are present, not past. And they keep on bringing up these things in the past, and they beat the battle cry for things that don't exist anymore, that really hardly exist anymore. And they keep on drumming up this stuff, and you would think the Japanese would understand this, because what happens in China when competition isn't happy that the Japanese, Toyota and Honda, Mitsubishi and that are grabbing too much market share in China? what do? They bring up the World War II sentiment and stoke the flames of the past into anti-Chinese movements or anti-Japanese movements. But what happens here in the United States? They get on the thing and they stoke the flames of anti-Chinese movements against Chinese corporations, and that's not fair play. Now, I talk about Chinese steel and that, but we have more than enough technology to test the quality of the steel now. And we should, like Mag Particle and many others, they test the quality of the metal. So there is very much inconsistency in the Chinese steel market. So that being said, you know that you have the systems to test. But they stoke these war cries, and this can be unfair play in a global competition where American corporations might be losing market share to a Chinese company, and they're losing share fairly, and they stoke the flames of anti-Chinese sentiment. And it damages their ability to gain market share. So we have to be very careful when you cry nationalism. We're the most diversified economy in the world. We have corporations from all over the world, plus diplomats from all over the world. So we have to be very sensitive about separating those corporations from military action. We can't intertwine the two continuously. Sometimes they need to be intertwined, and I understand that. But again, we got to be very careful about when we talk about anti-Chinese sentiment. And is it right that we are really worried about China? And I worry about North Korea as well. An anti-North Korean sentiment for launching, those missiles and so on. Their ability to do international trade is very much hindered. And I watched this and I learned from my Jewish friends that the anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. So there was Carson Ribs in Deerfield, and somebody started a rumor in the Jewish community that the owners of Carson Ribs were anti-Semites. Now, this is libel and slander, if untrue. And what did they do? They almost closed down, but Carson's, even after they made it through and were proven not to be, that they still took a continuous market share hit because everybody had questions in the back of their mind that maybe they were. So it really stifled their growth, and it was a growing franchise. And then there's a casino in Vegas, which was an Asian casino that I think might have been owned. I think the owner was a white guy. But Anyways, it was an Asian-themed casino. It was awesome. I wanted to go there. And it was one of the first times I was in Vegas. I was with a bunch of my Jewish friends. And they told me, oh, we don't go to that casino because the owner is anti-Semitic. So no, none of us Jews, we don't go to that. So we didn't go to that casino. I wanted to go. They refused to go. And so they boycotted that casino. It's gone now. It closed down. But we have to be very careful with Germany and, World War II movies and everything else, and the Holocaust Museum, talking about Nazism, and making sure that we are aware of the past, but the past is not the present, and teaching our children not to make the mistake of taking the past and making it the present. And this works for Christians related to Jews and Jews related to Christians. That we have to be very careful in mixing errors of sentiment that was gone, but people use it to make tactical moves. And that's why Austria has some of the strictest form of liability for slander or libel. And so, again, they take it seriously because of what happened in Germany. And you have to have substantiated your statements. And if not, even on social media, you can say, I went to a restaurant and I don't prefer that. Truly, I don't like that, and so on. And that's a subjective opinion, not an objective fact. But you have to clarify that subjective opinion. I've eaten Campbell's soup, and I've had that mushroom soup, and I like how Campbell's does it, and I've eaten Campbell's soup. Even with a subjective opinion, you have to substantiate that opinion with your history. And you say, well, usually I eat spicier foods. And it was bland. Like when I went into the restaurant and I had their... I just went into Hooters. It wasn't Hooters, actually, because I had clam chowder. It was somewhere else recently, and the clam chowder was very flat. Not spicy, dull. In my opinion, I like it with a little bit more flavor. But I have to substantiate that. I've eaten clam chowder. I searched in Boston for the best red and white clam chowder, and I've eaten Campbell's clam chowder and other soups clam chowder. Like Progressive soup, it tends to be a little bit bland for me. So I add pepper and some other spices to add a little bit more character to the Progressive soup. It tends to be very more neutral in flavor. And I like things that have a more distinct flavor. And so, again, if you're using this as a base ingredient for something, neutral can be good. But, again, what I'm saying is that even if it's subjective opinion, and I'll give you an example with my friend Robin. She didn't like this music artist that was in a run for Congress in a state. And she made the comment to me because I supported him on my social media. And she said, I don't like him. He's blank. And then I said, okay, you have that stance. I understand that. And then I sent her, for her comment, I broke down her comment. And each piece that she said she had a negative feeling for, I did research on. And I sent her my search. I didn't pick and choose articles. I sent her the search. I already looked at the search, but I sent her the search, unbiased. And the reason I sent the search, again, unbiased. So she's going to get everything in that search for that topic. And I wanted her to scroll through it. And so I sent her for each of the negative comments. I did searches on his history and addressed each of the negative comments. And she opened up the search history and she looked down, and I wrote her back after that. I said, did you get to look through each of the searches I gave you related to each of your comments? You said that this individual was negative with. And she said, yes. And she said, you're right. There's nothing here that substantiates my feelings and my intuition's off. But to give Robin credit, excuse me, to give her credit, it is a vibe that she had. And she said, my feeling. So, my spidey sense. Excuse me. So, yes, it might be that the visual of him, and I'll give you the guy, Kid Rock, the visual of him, or the tone of his music, or how he carries himself on stage. And he is a very much heterosexual, a proud heterosexual. And Robin was a lesbian. Hopefully, I pray to God, not anymore. But anyways, and so I don't think she liked his masculinity, because he tends to be very masculine. And so I think that's what Robin was feeling the negative sentiment about, because he is a very masculine male. And he portrays that and everything else. And her stance makes it feel negative. So it's a feeling, but still, you have to substantiate these things and understand them. And I give Robin credit. I didn't dismiss everything, but she said, yeah, based on these points, my feeling of negativity is off. But based on where she's coming from in her lifestyle compared to his lifestyle, there's this negative feeling he creates in her. And it makes sense because of her lifestyle choice and his lifestyle choice. It's going to create this natural negative sentiment. And she can see that through the visuals and how he carries himself and talks about his girlfriends and so on. And so it's going to create this feeling of negativity within inside her. So I just want you to understand that. So when you're making these things, you have to understand to dig a little bit deeper, and the Bible tells you to reflect. And so you have to reflect on where these feelings are coming. And one of them, you have to look, is it a lifestyle situation that causes this confrontation and not a performance situation where you don't agree with their lifestyle choices. And it could be that you don't agree, like, here, I'll give you a pastor, youth pastor, Tom. Tom was very aggressive with the boys. But Tom also is a balding male. Tom also is a shorter male. And so Tom has Napoleon complex. And he does. And I would watch him play basketball with, the 7th, 8th graders, sometimes the freshmen, the younger kids. And he would get incredibly physically dominant. Because Tom, he's just bigger than them. They're still developing. They're young. And he would physically take it to them. And you think, oh, Michael, maybe you're wrong and the kids. Well, Matt and Dan and them all played football with Tom as well. And Tom would tackle football, and he would tackle them hard. So one time, Tom was doing a crossing pattern, and Dan leveled him and hit him hard, and Tom got hurt. He hurt Tom. And Dan didn't feel bad, and nor should he. He did a legal hit and everything, but he laid into him. And I've done that. Like Bertram ticked me off, and we had to play running towards him, or people in football, we had to play running towards them, and I gave it extra effort to punish them when I hit them. And like with Bertram, when I was on top looking down at him after I ran over him, he's like, Mike, we have an understanding, and I'll never do that again. He did a cheap shot. And the play called for me to take out the middle linebacker. And when I hit him, I leveled him. He went horizontal. I went right over the top of him and plowed him into the ground. All perfectly legal hit. But he looked at me eye to eye. We were looking at each other, and he apologized and said, I'll never do that again. He never did it again. The reason I gave the story back to Dan was trying to teach Tom that we're not going to put up with this anymore, and that you can't keep on doing this incredibly aggressive, physically hitting us. So, again, Tom was, trying to feel more manly through it, and he failed to reflect upon this. And I never really had a heart-to-heart, but I always held that against him in that way, and that he was missing a premise of him, and he didn't evaluate his conduct. I believe there is a time that, yes, there's a certain amount of physical exchange so they understand where they stand, and that you're lesser and I'm more physically, and you have to learn that place between us when we interact. And that creates negotiations. Like the U.S. military is more physically dominant. And so that causes countries like Iran to do guerrilla warfare through terrorist organizations. And Israel is more physically dominant because of our support. And then they develop cutting-edge military industries, but all through our resources. We poured billions, if not trillions, into Israel. And so they develop this ability to have dominance over their Arab neighbors. That's why, the 7-Day War, Israeli forces were superior in capabilities, better training, but also unbelievably superior military equipment and satellite intelligence and other things. And they crushed these much bigger Arab armies, crushed them. So Israel has to understand on the other side that sent a message to these Arab countries that they must be worried about Israel. And so we created a little bit of an arms race in the Middle East. And then we further helped it when we had Iraq, gave them all the money in that to fight Iran. And then after that war was over, we were still funding Saddam. And Saddam used his massive tank army and everything, his mechanized army, to invade and conquer Kuwait and was threatening Saudi Arabia. So the reason I mention this is that you have to understand Saudi and Israel need to form a peace treaty and an understanding, because we don't want to create an arms race between Israel and Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia fears for their safety that Israel has nuclear weapons, which they do, and Iran fears big time because Israel has nukes. And so we created this imbalance in the Middle East where Israel, a small country, is the 50,000-pound gorilla, and these Arab countries worry because they don't have that type of capability. And so now Saudi Arabia is buying F-35 jets and so on. And they're doing this because they want parity, mutually assured destruction, basically. They don't want Israel to be somebody that can overwhelm them. So one way to settle it down is have a good peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Harmony, where Israel shows self-controlled over their military actions, and Israel is a country that has incredible ethics and morals, allowing them to feel at peace with Israel's superiority. That's what countries have to feel with the United States. They must believe in our system. They must believe in our purity. They must believe in our ethics and morals. Or if not, like Pakistan gets a nuclear missile because India does, and India and Pakistan are hated enemies. There's no trust. And so these countries do these things because they fear our military capabilities. And they feel weak, and they have a Napoleon complex. And they look for avenues where they can hurt us. And that avenues are soft targets. And so they go after and kidnap an individual like Nick Berg, and then make a video of him while they cut off his head. And so you have to understand why the diplomatic channel and the military is not always the first option. People have to trust your ethics, and this is why you need to work through the United Nations and through the United Nations Security Council and get United Nations accords and approval and use the International Court of Justice and so on to make sure you, as the most powerful nation in the world And this is what you don't understand. God's trying to teach you, as I'm trying to teach you. No matter what, I follow the rule of law. And the founding fathers understood that, where they said following the law is mandatory under the Constitution. It is, no matter how you feel, you follow the rule of law. God never disobeys the rules. He follows his own rule of law perfectly. But he is a supreme being, and he understands this. And so he never, ever violates his laws. Never, ever violates his laws. That's why you can have absolute trust in God. And that's why I have absolute trust in God in what he said to me and what he would do in retaliation for hurting me. And I have 100% faith in God that all those that do anything negative to me are in for, well, eternal pain. You had no right to do anything negative to me. And you really don't understand the Bible. And that's why I told you the pedophile pastors can't be pastors, and they're condemned. There's no salvation for them. In heaven, the most they can ask for is that they just perish and won't burn in hell. But that was a choice they made. See, God tries to teach you, and I'm trying to teach you, that even if you feel this way, going through my breakdowns and that going through all the wrongful terminations and that with the employers, there is a proper channel, and you must follow the rule of law and follow through the channels. And that's why I point out Miss Park, when she disobeyed and didn't go through the right procedures, her life was horrible. When she came clean and followed the procedures, I came into her life. And I adored her for her compassion for the North Korean people and wanting to go back and help. I watched the kid that came out of the 3-generation camp almost a decade before, and he didn't do anything about helping human rights in North Korea, trying to change their economics. But you don't know, my friend who goes to the Salvation Army Church, it's Korean, the largest Korean church in Chicago is actually the Salvation Army Korean Church. And he opens up manufacturing, and he works through the North Korean government to help build out their economics and employing their people, giving something to lose. Because you don't want to go to war if that war is going to destroy your country. Japan didn't go to war thinking the war was going to destroy Japan. They went to war to get resources so they can further build the strength, so that Doolittle raid, when they dropped the bombs in Tokyo, that was an incredible shock to Japan, that they could be harmed, because they went into the war thinking they couldn't be harmed and they could secure these resources from the Philippines and other countries around them, Korea and everything, China, and it could build out their power base. And when they realized they could be harmed, it was a wake-up call for them, and people started realizing, like when we bombed Germany for the first time, and eventually in 1944 you had the assassination attempt of Hitler, their vulnerability. And again, why did Germany go to war? Same thing, resources. They went to gather resources. Japan, the same way. We have global trade now. We have to understand when a country is resource stripped, that one way to acquire resources is to go to war. Another way is to use the purse and buy assets financially. But these countries, they don't have that. So you have Afghanistan and Iraq and others. The only way they can acquire resources is through terrorist action. Create fear and try to acquire resources and backers and so on. It's complicated, but the whole point is trying to do things through proper trade and understanding that stripping these people of their resources is not the right way to go about it. But me, I'm godly, so I just have to suffer and constantly try to work through the system to get the system to do the right thing. So I follow God's commandment. And so you don't understand that. And if you want to go to heaven, you have to be sanctified. And that means you can be totally 100% trusted to do the right thing. And when the Bible says a man can't lay with a man, that's generic. For men and women can't lie with each other. It's a thing of trust. That you will honor God's commandments. That you will follow the rule of law. And when you don't, you open yourself up to the demons and satanic, how do you say, possession? So again, if you want to go to heaven, you have to understand this, and I published this. But this is why the founding fathers, who were godly people, understood it was mandatory to follow the law. And our CIA can't do what they do, or the NSA. They have to go through a ethics. And ethics must govern everything they do. Because when things are brought to light, like the Bay of Pigs, the CIA operation, and you have these unethical things that they did, do you know that fueled Castro and empowered him more, showing that America was evil and unethical and one not to be trusted? And that's the problem with our CIA. They have throughout been misguided, and in Iran and in Cuba and many other places, showing that we're a country that can't be trusted, that will stab you in the back. And that's why I was peed during the two wars in the Middle East and Iraq, the first and second, and we left certain people behind, and we left them exposed like we did in Vietnam, and they would come back, the North Koreans, and kill the head of the village and kill his whole family in horrible ways. And we constantly leave our friends exposed. That's the doctrine. When you go in, you never come out. You don't leave your friends exposed. And when we pulled out of Syria and pulled out of Iraq, we left our friends exposed. So the only way to do this is to move in peacekeepers into Iraq and into Syria and work through the United Nations to stabilize everything so we can build on an ethical and moral foundation of trust. So you have to understand this. And this is the point I make with my own relationship with Jennifer Kim. She said she never broke a vow. She's never broke a promise. That she made these commitments to me and that she would never break these commitments. And the screws weren't taken to her. Everything was perfect with her family, with her friends. She was in management, making more money than ever. Everything was going perfect, but our relationship was stumbling somewhat. Not stumbling incredibly horrible, stumbling somewhat. And she chose the cards that I tossed over me. And that's a value choice. She was supposed to choose me. If I get in a car accident, and that's why I posted the Ferris Bueller thing where he kicks the car, and then he didn't mean to, but then he accidentally falls off the jack and goes off the thing. But what does he say? Now my father's going to come home and have to make a choice. Does he value me more or does he value the car more? And he's going to have to make that choice. And that scene in that movie, Ferris Bueller Days Off, weighs in the choices. And John Hughes made very good movies, Uncle Buck and that bring out very complex moral choices. And you see them, and he shows you the pathway and their decisions and how they end, but there are these moral dilemmas, and they get resolved. 16 Candles and many others. But the whole point, his father will address this issue with Cameron, and his father is going to have to make a choice. Who does he value more? And that was the total point of the cards. When I tossed them, Jen said she loved me and wanted to be with me just before that. And I wanted to challenge that to see in our heart of hearts that was true. And so I took these cards she made for me, I put them in a bag, and she said, if I throw them out, the relationship is over. I throw them out. But the whole point was to see if she, and then we went to bed, and I thought she'd wake up and recant, but she didn't. And she chose the cards over me. And to this day, that is her sin. She was supposed to choose me over the cards. Showing in our heart or hearts, when push comes to shove, she chooses me. So when I tell you about the black guy beating me as a child, or these other people, no matter who they were, that did this horrific thing, would I abandon God? Would I turn away from God? And as you would see through my life, I've never. And my faith is incredible in him. And so these are things, and he saved me. It's like the story of taking the child to the altar with Abraham. And just about going through with it, God stopped him. And each of these incidents, I'm alive. God didn't carry through or allow it to be carried through where it killed me. But, as I explained to you, this is the second thing I had to accept, is that God said that now he would allow me to be put to death by you. As God allowed Jesus to die on the cross, he allowed them to put him to death. Before that, Jesus was untouchable. No matter what they did, God interceded. And that's the same thing as Moses went to the Pharaoh. No matter what Moses did to the Pharaoh and his people, he was untouchable. And the Pharaoh came after him at the end, and he wiped them all out. God wouldn't allow it. But my thing was that now I'm in your hands, my life and my death. And he wants to see how you treat me, and he's not going to intercede. He's going to let you be yourself. And this is now Revelations and the test, to see who you truly are, how you lie to me, cheat me, deceive me, stab me in the back, betray me, how you failed to repent to me, and all of that. It's your trial. And he watches all of these things that you do to me. And if you kill me, so be it. That's your choice. But I'm telling you, as I was told, that these people that do these wrong to me, that's the end of them. And that if I get unjustly killed, it's the end of the world. But that's on you, and that's all I did in the beginning of 2016, is let you know where you stand. And God wants to see how righteous you are. Will you steal everything from me, stab me in the back, deceive me, lie to me, cheat me, in every way, be unrepenting to me because of your greed and selfishness for your industries? Truly, you don't care about justice and righteousness. You care that your industry, like law enforcement, if people become just, that you won't adapt and figure out how to reutilize, and you'll punish me and try to provoke me into criminal actions. And so every time I'm rubber, you're glue. And every time you do something negative to me, it only sticks on you. Nothing sticks to me in God's eyes. I'm sanctified, and nothing I can do is wrong in God's eyes. There is no thing I can do. There is no blasphemy. There is no nothing. So your test, my test is over. Your test began. And I have to accept that God will not intercede to save my life anymore, which is very disheartening. Do you think Jesus going to and understanding that? And that's why he said, Father, why have you forsaken me? But you don't understand that. He had to accept that. And I had to accept that. The forsaking. He's never abandoned me. He never abandoned Jesus. But truly, in the eyes of the flesh, he was abandoned. And he was allowed to be tortured and crucified without God interrupting or interceding on his behalf or any of the disciples that remained after him. And it's the same with Judas, as Jesus had told the disciples, it has to run its course. And do not intercede. As you do not intercede on my behalf, and God will not intercede on your behalf, Paul or any of the disciples, God didn't intercede on their behalf. Things had to run its natural course. And why is that? He wants to see who man truly is. He wants to see how righteous and just, or how unrighteous and how unjust man is. How filthy and disgusting they are, or how pure they are. And so that's the point of Revelations. And if you show that you're overwhelmingly disgust and disgrace, then there is no need for you any longer, and you should be all put to waste. So you're running into choices. And if you choose satanic and demonic, then the world should die. And I'm fine with that. If an asteroid came down or whatever and wiped us all out, I have no problem with that. Because all you've shown me for the last 10 years is how disgraceful and disgusting you are. And you've picked it up every day doing demonic and satanic activity to me, showing your disgrace and disgust. And so you're just burying yourself deeper. And God's watching how many rules and how many things you will violate on me. You've destroyed my life. You've destroyed my flesh. You desecrate me in every day. You leave me in loneliness and isolation. I don't have a spouse, a female. I lost the love of my life, this girl who was supposed to be with me for this life and eternity. And the only one who can be in my bed, as God said, is a female. And any other attempts is blasphemy and a sin against Christ, sin against God, eternal damnation for your attempts. You just sided with Team Satan and his demons. So I'll put this out there, but you don't understand this. And the founding fathers, look in the Constitution. It is mandatory that every citizen follow the law and work through the channels when there's discrepancies. And that's great for the legal field in that. That's great for the courts. And we get more precedents and we define everything better and better as these disparities come up. And so you work through the proper channels. And I learned this at John McCain. And I put this out there that people didn't know the proper channels. And this is why I'm for Constitution. It's not only taking a Constitution test, but when you bring in immigrants, they have to know how to exercise their rights properly. They need to know how to use 911 and when to use it, and when to use 311 or 211 for something else. I forget. 311 is non-emergency. But they have to understand their avenues. And if they can't afford a lawyer will be appointed for them. And they need to understand that's the point of the Amanda rights. You have the right to remain silent, and so on. And the point is informing them, these people, of don't. But in the Constitution and training of the immigrants, they should learn their Miranda rights. Truly, tourists that come into this country need to understand their rights. We need to do things correctly. And we need to screen them better so we don't get bad people coming into this country. And every time they commit a crime, we should be noting it and looking back at the background and how did we miss this? That this person committed rapes, or this person was part of MS-13 and so on and so forth. How did we miss this in our due diligence? Because immigration is HR for this country. Do you know that? Immigration is human resources for this country. And so they need to perfect their human resources skill, and they need to be thinking like human resources. That's what immigration is, human resources. And they need to take HR course. They need to become SHRM certified, higher designation in HR. And they need to think these things out. Even as Liz Savage did at Abbott, she did competitive analysis for salaries. And immigration should be benchmarking that out and making sure when an immigrant is working with a labor firm that that immigrant is getting paid a fair day's pay, as the Bible says. They need to be overseeing. They give the labor firm as a self-regulating, but they need to oversee the labor firm, making sure those immigrants are paid fairly for their job. If not, it's unethical. It's slave labor. It's theft. It's a scam. We bring them in with this opportunity, and then we scam them out of what they duly deserve. That means America would be running one big scam. So immigration is human resources. And we need to scan tourists correctly. And when they come in, it's still, where are they going? Where are they seeing? Because they need to be spreading the wealth around with tourism. Some places want more, but they need to work with the local, county, state. How much domestic tourism compared to international tourism? When they grant that visa is in a show. They're going to have to put in their travel plans, their agenda, where they're going. And so they can see, okay, well, you don't get the visa to the United States right now because we got too many people going to California. Because local law enforcement, county and state, they need to oversee with federal these immigrants on the ground. And they need to be able to make sure that they're safe. Like the Chinese girl who was killed at the University of Illinois. I'm still outraged that that happened. That she has a presumption of safety. And we didn't do a good job of educating her on how she should protect herself against potential predators. We can't allow them to be the lamb and that the citizens feast on them because of their ignorance, like Foster Bank did. It had these people working in it that were Koreans that spoke English, that were second generation or so, and they were taking advantage of the immigrants and screwing them over with their mortgages and everything else because they didn't understand going to the Loan Depot or whatever where they shop out the rates, or going to bankrate.com to compare the rates so they could be a better consumer, so they can be educated. And this is where these regulation organizations need to show them a comparative analysis. It isn't only the truth in lending. You show them the rate that you're giving. You have to show competitors' rates. And they must make their value proposition if they're charging a higher rate. Why am I paying more for you and I could go to a competitor and pay less? You must substantiate the value. It must be value-driven in the truth for lending, and they must show a comparison. And so they have to show competitors' rates for that similar mortgage. And they must document why. I had to do this in financial services. Do you know that? When I had an insurance policy that had a higher premium than they're currently paying to replace that policy, look it up. It's called churning. I had to substantiate why I was replacing that policy, number one, and number two, if it was a higher rate. I have to substantiate the value of that higher rate. Why is this higher rate more beneficial to them? They build more cash value, or the policy has a longer life expectancy, or it has better conversion features. But if not, I can be sued and disbarred, basically, use that term, from financial service and insurance. So our compliance, I had to make notes, and I had to justify why they're going to pay more for this policy and get rid of the current policy where the premium is less. And that's what the bank has to do too. They have to show their competitive rate, and they must justify the higher rate. And the client gets to walk away. Because if they don't want that value, well, that's too bad. But the client has to be informed. They can't hide it. So Truth in Lending needs to be modified and show competitive rates to that. Progressive does with their app. They say, go look at competitors and compare them to us. We'll save you X. Well, it has to be an apples-to-apples comparison. Because there might be something else there that they're getting more value from that Progressive is not giving, and that's not an apples-and-apples. That's a bait-and-switch. So Progressive has to do its due diligence and better damn well make sure that they're offering comparable coverage at a better price, or they're committing fraud. So they have the app and they say, go out, compare us. Well, that's what Truth in Lending needs to do. You have to show the competitive rates for similar, and you must, if you're charging more, show your value proposition. And if you're charging less, well, that's your value proposition. They're paying less with you than the competitor. Go to Travel Velocity. What does it do? It compares all the rates. Go to any of these and they compare the rates. So you, the consumer, can make an educated choice. And so we can't have this shit. And the Department of Labor needs to start benchmarking firms and citing them for labor abuses, actively underpaying for a position that governs a higher wage. I don't believe in minimum wage. I believe in competitive wages. But I believe the Department of Labor has the ability to censure them, fine them, penalize them, and then turn over to the FBI for criminal prosecution if need be, if warranted. And they have to benchmark those wages. As my friend Liz Savage, you could ask her, at Avi, or Abbott, Avi, she constantly benchmarked, and so did John Hancock, my employer. Every fee we had, we benchmarked to competitors to justify it to our clients. We had to justify our cost. So we're supposed to be a nation of morals and ethics that follow these things. And so OSHA needs to look at these and rank what? The risk factors of each occupation and give that to the Department of Labor, which is a sub, because it's supposed to risk, and then the Department of Labor uses that risk rating to see if they're paying them right, if they work in an offshore oil platform, or if they're an offshore diver for an oil platform, that they're getting the risk premium for what they're doing, because their occupation has a higher risk. The U.S. military. Navy SEALs need to be paid more. Delta Force needs to be paid more. We give them more training, but they're going into things that have higher risk. And any position with higher risk needs to be paid more. The risk premium. And so OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety Administration, is supposed to be looking at this and continuously looking at the injuries and that of every occupation. And then readjusting, like trial attorneys. They have lots of mental breakdowns. So the ones that not plea bargain but actually go to trial tend to have higher rates of mental breakdown. And so they have to give them a higher risk premium. Chiropractors, because they, unlike nurses in that, chiropractors manipulate your body and everything else. And in turn, chiropractors do a lot of contortion on their own body to do movements on you. They put a lot of physical strain on their muscles and skeletal structural, and chiropractors themselves get in a lot of injuries, which I knew because I was trying to sell disability to chiropractors. And chiropractors have a high rate of disability. And so OSHA is supposed to be working with the National Organization of Chiropractors, if that's it, I don't know, and providing them with information saying that your profession needs to address its risk factors better, and that you have an abnormal amount of severe injuries or disabilities of chiropractors, which they do. And chiropractors commit a lot of fraud, but that's a secondary, but they do because they know how to fake injuries. And so chiropractors, when the practice isn't going well, tend to create a lot of disability fraud. And that's what happened to the guys on the exchanges. They work with chiropractors and other specialists that told them how to fake the injuries so they could get these settlements from the disability company. Like one of my friend's older brother, he faked his injury and was getting $500,000 in disability payment. He had an own occupation, and he was getting $500,000 a year in disability payments. And an insurance investigator caught him doing certain things that he said he couldn't do. And so I don't know what happened, but they took him to court in that, and he got caught for scamming the insurance company. But that being said, OSHA is supposed to do this and constantly look at all this information about injuries, whether it's in the military or in Congress. Do congressmen have more mental breakdowns? Do they have more heart attacks? Do they have more strokes? And they're supposed to make those organizations aware of those risks by aggregating the data that goes to the health insurance providers. And this is where Obama mandated that all the medical records must be digitized and available online for who? OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety Administration. And they're supposed to be looking at these things. So they need to put on the medical forms their occupation and give it a coding for occupation. What do you do for a living? And employers need to put their code on their paycheck. Technician and SIC code, blank, whatever the occupational code is. Payroll companies have to include that now on their paycheck. And employers must inform their employer of the occupational code, and it must go on their health insurance card. Why? So the doctor knows and can pull up the occupational risk. Occupational risks. And then you must fill out a hobby questionnaire. What things do you do? Do you work with a personal trainer, or do you personal train on your own? On my own. Do you follow a preset routine by Planet Fitness, or do you do random workouts independently based on how you feel? Higher risk, uninformed, more likely for injury, following Planet Fitness. Planet Fitness, when they set up that 30-minute in that, and they have those, and you follow their routines, that's a transfer of risk. And if that routine hurts you, Planet Fitness can be sued. But the doctor has to know, do you skydive? Do you ski? Do you do this? And they're like, well, your tendons and ligaments are a little weak. I would recommend a knee brace if you go skiing now, because it seems like your knee, they test it, the lateral movement in that. And they recommend to you that I would recommend a knee brace, and this type of knee brace, so when you go skiing, that you don't injure your, tendons and ligaments, per se. That's what preventative medicine is supposed to do. But the doctor needs to know, what do you do? And feel free to talk to your doctor if you're doing aggressive forms of sex and you're trying the Kama Sutra, which has very physical sexual positions, and people get hurt all the time doing the Kama Sutra. If you've ever looked, there is positions in there that are unbelievably physically demanding. And they should rank these, that you have to have advanced skill sets, you have to have, because you can seriously injure yourself with those positions. Truly, and some of them are actually life-threatening. So, again, these are things that we need to do. And we need to move forward every day to be more just and righteous. But I'm going to leave this. I'm hungry, and I got to go to the bathroom. God bless.